Hello and welcome back to theme 1 of political geography, the foundations of political geography. Did you know that an influential German geographer who was a general in the First World War had an important role in informing Hitler's foreign policy and his plans to invade Eastern Europe? It's interesting. We're going to come back to that later. To remind you where we're at, we're looking at the foundations of political geography. And I would encourage you, as you follow this video, to use the handout reading list that I placed on Canvas for you to do that. So last week we looked at the last session, we looked at the origins of political geography and the argument that there's a politics and a geography to political geography. And what we're going to do now is we're going to look at these origins, and we're going to divide this overview of political geography into 3 parts. Antecedents, that is what happened before the modern period. The era of ascendancy, that's in the 19th and early 20th centuries, when geographers were advising Hitler or were members of parliament or were prime ministers, even political geographers. And then next week's theme, we're going to look at political geography today. And the key point is there is a politics and a geography to political geography. So the first phase I want to look at, if we divided this into 3 phases as your handout shows, is antecedents. Now, political geography, as we know it, took shape in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And most of this lecture theme for this week will concentrate on that. But there are historical antecedents, and this part of the lecture will look at some. Now, most of these consider the relationship between the environment and the political community, whether that is a state or an empire or a city-state, etc. The importance shouldn't be exaggerated. These writers were more influential in other fields, but still they have the germs, the origins of modern political geography within them. And much of European thought derives from the Greek and Roman writers. And we'll start by taking a look at Aristotle. Now, rather than just show you pictures of Aristotle and talk about his ideas, I wanted to try something different. Behind me you can see an advert that the university uses to promote this university for students, and it says, "Study with us and you will achieve great things." Now, that's not the half of it. That is not the half of it. The greater thing we're going to try today is time travel. We're going to try time travel. So I'm going to make a potion. And in this potion, I'm going to mix some olive oil. So you can hopefully see that this is real olive oil in there. Napolini, other brands are available. Let's put some Madeira in, shall we? Yes, that's looking good. What else needs to go in here? I think some Tabasco. Let's put some Tabasco in, just a drop. It's strong stuff. And finally, I think we need a little bit of sugar. So let's tip some sugar in. Let's swirl it around. You are seeing the first ever demonstration of time travel at Newcastle University. Let's take a sip, shall we, and see what happens. Ooh. Ooh. Good morning, students. I am Aristotle, the great Greek philosopher and instructor who taught in Plato's Academy, the archetype of the modern university. Now, we Greeks, we ask big questions in life about the nature of reality, about knowledge, but we ask these for very practical reasons. We asked, what is a good life? Every discipline has its key question. For philosophy is, what is a good life? But for you geographers it is, what is a good place? And part of the answer we discovered, which I in my great wisdom expounded, was that the
The answer to what is a good life is found in a balance between human passions, between intellect and ambition, and a balance between different parts of the body politic, the community. And I wrote an essay on what is the ideal state. A very fine essay on your reading lists, on the Canvas web pages, I am told to instruct you. And in this wonderful paper, which you should read, all of you, the question I asked was, what are the conditions for the ideal or perfect state? And I identified 5 features. Population size. Now, some people in error, think a large state is obviously better. But they would be mistaken, because if a state becomes too large, it can't be governed well. There can't be law and order. If the state is too few people, it can't operate. So, the ideal state is one which combines good order with good size. This is divine, this is beautiful. And of course, too many foreigners in the state are bad. They aren't part of the community. So the second feature of a good state I identified was territory. Again, the territory should not be too large, so you can't defend it, but it should not be too small. It needs to be self-sufficient. Each state needs to be self-sufficient. The third is external relations. A state should be by land and sea. Sea for supply under siege. A market is useful, but outside the main city gate. So it can benefit from trade, but control who comes in and influence of foreigners. The fourth aspect of the ideal state, I argued, was the internal structure. Basically, its location, as you geographers would say. It should be located to maximize health in terms of climate and winds, be convenient to citizens but inaccessible to foreigners who may want to attack. It should have an abundance of springs and fountains, vital, as you know, if a state is under siege. And the population characteristics are the fifth feature of the ideal state. Now, these are easy to see looking at the world. Think of the people in Europe. The climate there is cold, and the people are full of spirit. But they lack intelligence and skill, and therefore can't organise themselves. Now, think of the people in Asia. The Asians are intelligent and inventive, but they lack passion because it's so hot, and they will be subject peoples. But the Hellenic race, the Greek race, I argued, situated perfectly between Europe and Asia, is high-spirited and intelligent. And within Greece, the greatest city in the most perfect position, which balances all these factors, is of course Athens, my own state. Ooh. Ooh. Well, I hope you found Aristotle interesting. In fact, I bought this wreath with my own money just for this lecture. No expense spared in your education. So there are two themes we see in Aristotle, and this origin is antecedent of a political geography. The first is how to make a state survive. It's, if you like, advice for the prince. It's advice for the rulers and the powerful. And the second is the importance of human environmental relationships. Where is the ideal state in terms of land and sea and climate? So these two themes, advice to the rulers and human environment relationships, can be seen in other moments, other histories of political geography. And I want to take you back now to the 17th and 18th centuries. And of course, to do that, we need to modify the potion. So let's add a bit of vinegar, and also, actually, can anyone tell me what do we need to add to get back to the 17th and 18th centuries? Shout out your answers. Ground cumin, not bad, you're getting better. Nearly cinnamon. Put some ground cinnamon in, swirl it all around, and let's see where it takes us. Ooh. Ooh. Gadzooks privy. I am Sir William Petty, Cavalier, and at your service. Yes, I am a forerunner of political geography, and in the 17th and 18th century, I had an extraordinary influence on what would come later, as I served my king and country, as I serve you today. No, I was a medical student, but I spent 4 years of my life mapping Ireland. I was the first person to produce an atlas of the country, compiled in the field, so to speak. It was called A Pocket Companion of Ye Roads of Ireland, a book in which I described it as a geographical description of the Kingdom of Ireland. And at the start of the book, I wrote a section which I described as knowing the country. And I wrote the things you needed to know, the territorial divisions, where those military barracks were. I wrote, I described the human and natural and agricultural resources of Ireland. In each place, it was very clearly worked out. And a joy to read and to write, I should say. Now, it's a text of interest to you, but I think, as young political geographers, I think I know which is more interesting of my books. Oh yes, I do. It was published in 1711, posthumously, after my death, and it was entitled Essays in Political Arithmetic. It was a theory of the state's influence, of the importance of capital cities, for example, and the importance of distance. So I had a chapter in the book on the impediments to England's greatness. Now, I describe some of these impediments. For example, the Isles of Man and Guernsey and Jersey and Ireland all had their own little bitty arrangements. And I said, no. We needed to make a single territorial unit, so it was all rationally organised, so we could have rational taxation and rational military recruitment. We could raise armies to make England, as I wrote, the greatest country on earth. And that was my great plan as a forerunner of political geography. At your service and farewell. Woo again. Hello. So you can see from these two antecedents to political geography, Aristotle in ancient Greece and Sir William Petty in the 17th and 18th century, you can see these key themes of political geography. And there's two themes we've identified. The importance of the environment. Human-environment interactions. So for William Petty, it's about understanding the distribution of natural resources so that England can exploit them and be great. And for Aristotle, it's about the ideal location. And secondly, it's advice to the ruler. Aristotle wanted his state, Athens, to be the greatest. William Petty wanted his state, England, to be the greatest. So you see, there is a politics and a geography to political geography. Where these two writers were and when they lived and their political loyalties determined to a large way the type of political geography that they produced. So that's the period of the antecedents to political geography. And I want to look secondly, if you like, at phase two,
be following your reading list, please, so you can follow this. The era of ascendancy. The era of ascendancy. And this is sort of 1875 to about 1945. And the background here is important. This was a background of geopolitical competition. The rise and fall of empires, European empires, Italy, France, Russia, Britain, expanding, the Netherlands expanding out across the world, trying to divide up the world between themselves. And it led, of course, almost inexorably to these two great world wars of World War I and II. So that's the first background, the geopolitical background. But intellectually, the most important idea at that time was evolution. So evolution is simply a theory that explains the diversity of biological life. But in the second half of the 19th century, it became imbued with all sorts of political ideologies. And this influenced the founding fathers and mothers of political geography. Friedrich Ratzel, a German, said this. He said, "The nation is an organic entity." This is on your reading list. He said, "States grow as their superior culture enables them to grow, overtaking smaller ones. Survival of the fittest." It was a justification for empire. Ellen Churchill Semple. She was an American geographer, a founding member of the Association of American Geographers, and its first female president. She communicated Ratzel's work to the Anglo-American world. And she said this, she said, "Man is a product of the Earth's surface." Man is a product of the Earth's surface. So they had these evolutionary ideas, and these influenced political geography. And this could be interpreted in two ways. What sort of view of evolution informs political geography? And we're going to look at two of those. But an important background is in 1884, John Scott Kelty was appointed by the Royal Geographical Society as an inspector of geography for 1 year. And he was to report on the state of geographical education in Britain and abroad. And abroad particularly meant Germany. He contrasted in his report the teaching of geography in Germany and in Britain. And in Germany, he observed there were 12 professorships, 12 chairs of geography in Germany. And the Germans had used maps, he argued, to help win the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. He argued that geography should be recast in Britain as a science in the cause of empire. And this raised a basic question: what should geography in Britain be? And he wrote, in his report, he raised this question: what should geography be? And for the rest of this lecture video, we're going to consider the two major responses. And the first was evolution. Geography should be about evolutionary competition. And to understand that, we're going to drink some of our time travel potion and meet the main man, Sir Halford Mackinder, who advocated this theory. Well, welcome today. Delighted to meet you. I am, of course, Sir Halford Mackinder, 1861 to 1947. Born, and I was the founder of modern geography, as the discipline is known, and the world's greatest and most famous political geographer. I was born in 1861 and I went up to Oxford in 1880 and studied natural sciences. Now, evolutionary biology was all the rage then, and I absorbed this and believed that the evolutionary worldview of a competition, natural selection, survival of the fittest, applied equally to the human world. And I wove together my interests in geography and natural sciences and biology into a holistic vision, what I called a new geography. Now, I said this. I said that the current teaching at the time of geography was boring and dull. just describing geomorphological processes or learning facts, the shapes of countries and the capital cities and so forth. Well, I said, that's no challenge for a man of science. No. So I drew a vision of the new geography, the interconnectedness of the world. And I argued that since European expansion, we now have a single world. And the state that is best grasped, is best placed to grasp this holistic vision of how the interconnected world works, is the best placed state to survive in the competition of all against all, modern geopolitics and empire. Now, I had a vision beyond the academy. In 1887, I met in 1884 when John Scott Kelty held his exhibition and wrote his report. I was very interested. I met the man and he liked me, took a liking to me and invited me to give a lecture in 1887 to the Royal Geographical Society itself, called On the Scope and Methods of Geography. And it was my response to Kelty. I sketched out a holistic vision of geography based on evolutionary biology, which I said will satisfy at once the practical requirements of the statesman and the merchant, the theoretical requirements of the historian and the scientist, and the intellectual requirements of the teacher. I became the director of LSE, the London School of Economics. I was the first modern geography lecturer. I was appointed to Oxford. I became a member of Parliament in 1910 and campaigned on tariff reform, creating a single economic trade bloc for the European Empire, the British Empire. In 1990 and 1920, I was sent to South Russia as a British High Commission there in order to stir up anti-Bolshevik, anti-communist resistance. I was a member of the Imperial Shipping Committee, and it has been alleged I was possibly a murderer. If you want to find more about that, you must take Dr. McGoran's third-year course on geopolitics. Well, in 1900, I visited Newcastle and spoke at the Tyneside Geographical Lecture, so I'm delighted to be back. Now, my main paper, and this is of particular importance to you as political geographers, was published in 1904. It was called The Geographical Pivot of History. And in this map, I sketched the vast interplay of Europe and Asia. And I argued that Europe, over time, had conquered most of the world. The Spanish and Portuguese conquered the Americas. Most of Africa is under European control. Russia is controlling much of Asia, the Caucasus region. And Britain controls South India. But Asia repeatedly has not been able to be controlled by Europe, or quite the opposite. The Asiatic hammer has repeatedly struck Europe. The Huns and the Goths and the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths and all the other types of Goth, which surged across Asia and destroyed the Roman Empire repeatedly, sacked Rome, the Huns. Or in the 13th century, the Mongol hordes smashed the Persian and Russian empires. Why is it that Europe has not been able to dominate Asia? Now, it's not due to civilization. No, it's due simply to geography. Simply to geography. The vast Asia, centre of Europe-Asia, which I call the pivot of world history, is impossible to attack. You can't attack it from the north because of the Arctic Ocean's frozen. You can't attack it from the south due to the mountains, the Himalayas, the Tian Shan, the Pamirs, etc. But you can attack out from it by horse. This is the geographical pivot of history, and Asia is the dominant geographical place in history. Now, for a brief period, when Columbus discovered the New World and was able to extract gold, Europe could create great empires. And on the basis of these empires, this money, it could take over much of the world. But this was just a blip in history. A blip in history, because now, I argued, with technology, with railways, with industrialization, the country that is able to control this vast geographical pivot of history can exploit its great wealth and build an empire. A vast economic world around this pivot. It will be able to control the pivot, control Europe, Asia, Africa, and eventually the world. And I argued that the state In order to understand this, in order to thrive, Britain needs to understand this. And the only way to stop it will be to try and control Eastern Europe and to try and have a ring of states all around the pivot. That's the only way the British Empire can survive. And this was the basis of my new geography. And it became the basis of modern geography as I became the founder of the modern discipline.
So that was the first of the responses that we're going to look at to the Royal Geographical Society's report of what geography ought to be. Halford Mackinder took evolution and used it to describe a war of all against all, and said that to survive, Britain needed to be able to understand the geographical rules and compete. So this is again the history of geography as being about the influence of the environment on human society, but also advice to the rulers to help their country succeed. I'm going to pause here and I've put up again the slide from the first video, the two articles to read, the two guided reading pieces for this themes week. I hope you've already read them both. If you haven't, please don't go on before reading them both. The first one which you read was Halford Mackinder's The Geographical Pivot of History, and I hope you can understand how that works in this context. The second one is Prince Kropotkin's What Geography Ought to Be. This was a response again to Royal Geographical Society's report. It was based on evolution, but Kropotkin took it in a very different way. If you haven't read that, please pause and stop now and read it. You'll get the most out of it. If you have, then let me take you back in time to the late 19th century and introduce you to Kropotkin.
Ooh. Sir, this is good stuff, this. So Здравствуйте! Как дела? Все хорошо? Давай. I am Prince or Peter Kropotkin. I was born in 1842. A prince from the Russian royal family. And when I joined the military, I asked to be sent to Siberia. And in Siberia, I made a careful study of landscapes and of animal and human interactions, animal-environment interactions, and of the animals themselves. And I established for myself a reputation of being a great geographer. Хорошо. But I increasingly came to question the state of the peasantry in Russia. I wrote this: science is an excellent thing. I knew its joys and valued them, perhaps more than any of my colleagues did. Even now, as I was looking to the lakes and hillocks of Finland, new and beautiful generalizations arose before my eyes. A grand picture was rising, and I wanted to draw it to open new horizons for physical geography. But, I wrote, what right had I to these highest joys, when all around me was nothing but misery and struggle for a mouldy bit of bread? The condition of the peasants in Russia was very poor at that time. So I returned to St. Petersburg and became active in activities against the Tsar and the royal family. I dropped the title Prince and became simply Peter Kropotkin. I was imprisoned and wrote great geography books while I was in prison. And I came to be convinced of anarchism. Anarchism is basically the belief that people are best left to organize themselves, and they get on with it better without the top-down structures of hierarchy and organization. It's a very sensible idea. So you think of the schools in the university. It's better that the teachers do the teaching than the government tells them what to teach. It is better that the doctors and the nurses do the healing than they get the targets from the government. The obvious thing is obvious. The people organize themselves the best. And I came about this belief in anarchism by my travels in Siberia.
I visited Switzerland in 1872 and I saw examples of cooperation. The trade guilds, the cantons, they did not need the hierarchy. It worked brilliantly. I came to be convinced that this was the best principle for organizing society at the bottom level by the people who do the jobs. But also I concluded it was the key principle in nature. So how did this relate to evolution? Well, you see war between species and war within species. But I argued from my observations in Siberia that war within species had been overemphasized by the social Darwinists, by people like Alfred Mackinder. I argued instead, what we see in nature is cooperation. Great societies of animals cooperating together to thrive together rather than fighting each other. And I wrote this as my geography contribution. I was honoured by the Royal Geographical Society. I spent much time in Newcastle. Yes, Newcastle is very important for its radical history. There was a commune at Cloudon Hill. I came and spent time with this anarchist commune. And at one point, I was imprisoned in France at one point. No newspaper or journal in Europe would publish my ideas, or America. The only place I could publish my essays was the Newcastle Chronicle, which is still read today. A great history, a great radical history here in Newcastle, as I came to Newcastle. Well, how does this relate to geography? Well, you know that in 1884, Kelty Scott released his report about what geography should be. He was a friend of mine. We corresponded. And so I wrote in 1885 a response to his paper, like Alfred Mackinder did 2 years later. And my paper was called What Geography Ought to Be. I was in prison in France when I wrote it, in Paris, for my activities. I said there are 3 tasks of geography. The first is to awaken a love for inquiry, for amazement at the world. And here I agreed with Alfred Mackinder that the present teaching of geography was dull. It should be about amazement and wonder. Хорошо. 2. For the second point, I argued geography must render another more important service. It must teach us from our earliest childhood that we are all brethren, whatever our nationality. And so, for the third and final point, and this was the hardest of all, what geography should be, I argued that geography's role was dissipating the prejudices in which we are reared with regard to the so-called lower races. It was a damning critique I gave of European racism and imperialism. All humans are one, have one ability and one flesh and one blood. And the task of geography is to awaken those sentiments. And that was my response to Scott Kelty's report about what geography should be. Ooh. So I hope you enjoyed meeting some of these characters. As you saw with Kropotkin and Mackinder, both of them responded to the same question, what should geography be? Both of them used evolutionary theory. One of them said it should be about understanding how human society is always in war against each other, and we should understand geography to help us win this war. And the other, Kropotkin, the anarchist, as opposed to Mackinder's imperialism, said no, we learn from animal behaviour cooperation, and society, it should be essentially seen as cooperative, and geography's role is to awaken that spirit of cooperation. So, 2 conclusions of this week's theme about the foundations of political geography. We can see as we look at the antecedents. So political geography is about the study of the intersections between space and power. We can see from the antecedents, from Aristotle, from Sir William Petty, from Kropotkin, from Mackinder, you can see 2 things. The influence of
the environment and political geography? What is the ideal state? How can we understand and exploit its resources? What does evolution tell us about how human societies should work and how we create a better society? That's the first. And the second is that political geography was influenced by the time in which these political geographers wrote. And they sought to play a role. So Aristotle believed that he was trying to help his state do well. For Mackinder, he was an MP. He wanted the British Empire to survive. Kropotkin was also active in politics. So he was influenced by, of course, by a very different set of ideas, by anarchism. Haushofer, he was the chap I mentioned earlier, the German general. He advised Hitler. Isaiah Bowman and the French geographer Martin were at Versailles, dividing Europe up after the First World War. And the geographer Count Teleki was Premier of Hungary. Geographers were trying to influence their society for as they saw it good. However, so you can see there is a politics in the geography to political geography, right? Where these people were influenced by their place and their time. However, this period of influence was seen by the discipline as disastrous because of political geography's implications with Nazism. It fell out of favour. It led to a period of decline, and then from the 1960s onwards, a period of revival, and it's doing some really interesting things at the moment. But that is the theme that we'll take up next week. So thank you for your attention. Do send me questions. Do post them on the discussion board or send them by email. Please try and send them by Thursday, and I'm going to put them all together and release a video answer to some of those questions. You can make your questions anonymous if you like. Just say you don't want me to mention your name if you send me it by an email. And so do please look at the lecture video for guided reading for this week. Thank you very much for your attention. Please do get in touch. It's the first lecture I've made, as you know. So if you could give suggestions about what works or what doesn't work, what you liked and what you didn't like, I would really like that. It would help me and the whole teaching team really improve our teaching and make this a great year for you. Thanks very much. Bye.